Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Born Political. I'm your host, Joe Delacruz. Normally, this show is interviewing guests and trying to find out where they came from, who they are. It's been my favorite part of the show. I've been really enjoying it. I think a lot of folks from around town didn't realize how much they actually like some people that were around town and across our state. Tonight, it's going to be a little bit different format. Honestly, with what our country's going through at this current time, another school shooting. I know there's a lot of folks, especially in Connecticut, that have been brought back to that day just about 10 years ago, where we were just shocked and in disbelief of what happened, especially in our state where we consider ourselves safe. I think for the whole country, it made us feel unsafe in a lot of different ways. And this is a reminder. Tonight, I wanted to bring somebody in that's kind of dedicated a lot of her time and effort to preventing crimes and violence like this, whether it's safe storage or it's the judicial system, making sure that we have a system that's going to protect victims. Tonight, all the way from Stamford, I want to thank her in advance again before I introduce her, because we all know the 95 from Stamford to Groton, or I say Greenwich, from Greenwich to Groton. That's easy to say. Greenwich to Groton is not the easiest road, so thank you for coming. The guest tonight is Michele Voigt. She's from Violent Crime Survivors. She's a co-founder, and I know she's done a lot of other things. We're going to get to know her briefly and then talk about what she's been doing. Michele, welcome to the show, and thank you for driving this far to see me.
Well, thank you. I'm sad to be here for the reason that I'm here, but I'm glad that we can take some time to shed some light on an important issue in our state.
Yeah. So. Coming from, are you from Connecticut first, or just to get you a little background of who you are?
No, I'm from California.
From California.
Yes, I've been in Connecticut. I've been back and forth. I try to go back to California, and then Connecticut always brings me back this direction. So we've gone back and forth, but we've been here off and on for 10 years. In Los Angeles, I ran a nonprofit that worked with multi-barriered populations. Assisting them with living and working independently. So I had a background in advocacy and social services that I brought with me here to Connecticut.
And did you grow up in California, or you grew up in
I actually grew up in Oklahoma, but
so you're all
I'm
over.
all over the place.
That's awesome. So again, that's mostly what our show would be, us talking about who you are the whole time. And I would be absolutely honored one day to be able to have that show. But talking about the issue at hand and how you got involved, I think off camera we talked about, you started was Moms Demand Action one of the first groups that you were working with?
Yes, it was my first gun violence prevention organization.
It was. And so Moms Demand Action is a group that was started up by a group of moms, I guess we would say, in yourself, in response to, Sandy Hook and a few. Is MDA that old, or is it?
Yes, it started after Sandy Hook.
It did.
Yes.
And as Sandy Hook Promise is also a group that you guys collaborate with. I know that.
Yes.
I've seen you at the same meetings.
Yes, Newtown Action Alliance, Connecticut Against Gun Violence. We have quite a coalition here in our state.
And I think to me, especially being a state rep and being in politics, a lot of people look to me locally for answers. Mm-hmm. And immediately when something happens, they say, oh, here we go. We're going to talk about this issue. Now's not the time. It's to this, it's to that. I think your group says that every day is the time to talk about gun violence. Every day is the time to talk about, issues that are affecting our kids, our children, our victims, our communities. And I think that's what you've been striving to do. And, what are you, the arm of your group is different, because Moms Demand Action was a certain group, and now the new group that you're involved with here within the last year is concentrating more on the victims and survivors, correct? Or?
Right. With Moms Demand Action in Everytown, I worked as a survivor membership lead and worked with specifically survivors of gun violence. And Moms Demand Action is an advocacy organization, a national advocacy organization. And getting close to and working with the survivors, it became acutely aware to me how trauma impacts their daily life, and how much support and services were not readily available to them to help them in their survivorship. So I partnered with Jen Lawler, who lost her daughter to gun violence in 2018, she was murdered by a former dating partner. Jen Lawler and I came together and we created Violent Crime Survivors to really meet the unmet needs of survivors and to also work with all violent crime victims and survivors. So we serve people who, most of the people we work with sadly have experienced gun violence or a loss of someone they love through gun violence, but we also work with other victims of violent crime.
My wife and I know Jen Lawler, and obviously, you know, you folks out there know me. I am the local guy, but we lost our son to gun violence, and we talked off air about all these things that you have dreams about of, you know, being I say grandma and grandpa, but me and my wife and I are Lolo and Lola. Our dreams of doing that, our dreams of being called a retiree one day, our dreams of being called a dad, of all these different things. Our dreams never include losing our children.
Right.
Our dreams that's never part of the dream. I think we all are fearful that it could happen or possibly happen. But you know, when we lost our son and became members of Survivors of Homicide, we had Moms Demand Action reach out to us. A lot of groups that offered us support that we didn't realize was needed, but we knew we needed it once it happened to us.
Right.
Once they reached out and was speaking with us about, you know, how we can move forward. But to look past, and when the cameras go away, like you said, when it was all over, we were lucky enough to have a community that my wife and I didn't cook for 4 months.
Right.
We had a community that was so solid behind us and our family was just so incredible. You know, Tammy and I watch shows now, and you know, we used to watch that First 48, and the officer goes in and tells the mom that they're not going to see their child again, and the moms they walk away and they're kind of left alone, and and we just didn't. We felt almost like a guilt for the support we had, knowing that doesn't happen everywhere, and I think that's what your group is trying to address.
Correct. It doesn't happen everywhere, and quite often, sometimes we see that it does initially happen, but those supports die off over time, and people find themselves alone, stigmatized. A lot of, there's a silence that surrounds survivorship. It's something that we don't talk about. I think a lot of people, like, they come in and they have good intentions to support people, and like you said, part of that is based on the fear that would maybe actually happen to themselves. But as time goes by, people's lives go on. Their kids go on and graduate and get married. But for survivors, especially parents that have lost their children, their lives do not go on. It doesn't change. It doesn't. No. I think a lot of times society expects survivors and victims to move on. Hasn't it been long enough? And life does move on, but often survivors get stuck and left behind. And everyone has their own process, and everyone grieves and lives differently. Yeah. But in this country, we are a nation of survivors. 58% of all people surveyed say that they know someone who has been a victim of gun violence, or they personally have been a victim of gun violence. Not just looking at gun violence, not including other violent crimes. So we know there's tons of people out there that continue to have to live differently and live differently forever. But we haven't, as a country, really spent the time or resources to research that and figure out what support services and trauma support services they actually need.
It's hard because we talked about the crossover too off camera. But my wife and I run Community Speaks Out with a great board, a working board. 9 people that get incredible amounts of things done. But when we see their situations and the situations they're in, it may be drugs, but it's connected deeply to gun violence, to domestic violence, to child abuse, so we have these long string of things that I think affect us in a way that doesn't in any other country. And I think that's
Right.
That's I think the concerning part when people say, well, you can't do much about it because it is what it is. That's not the answer that moms and dads are looking for, that sisters and brothers who lost people. Well, we're looking for real answers, and the answers have to be out there because in other countries, for example, even with the drugs, we're only 5% of the world's population, and we take 68% of the world's opiate prescription medicines. That is an absolute staggering number.
Right.
We're only 5% of this world and this population, and we also take 80% of the world's illicit drugs. I mean,
Right.
those are numbers that just show you that sometimes we're reaching outside of our country to see what our problems are, and it's the problem begins with us.
Right.
We have to figure out, it goes, even in my mind, I go back to thinking, God, it's almost shameful now to say that your parents are moving back in with you, because in America, we create our own space and we carve out this area for ourselves. And when I grew up, we had a house full.
Right.
My aunt and my uncle lived with us,
Right.
with my grandmother and their 3 kids, and my mother, who was divorced, with my sister, myself, and my brother. I mean, it was a 3-bedroom house, and we were tight, but there were a lot of eyeballs on me.
Right.
and
Right.
and now it's looked upon as that's not the right way to be a family or raise a family. But I think overwhelmingly in Europe, they would think nothing of that.
Right. And then many cultures. Yes.
And our culture seems to be pulling us away. And I think, and I mean, it's always be about the family. I think it always, if it's drug issues, and we're experiencing that a lot more than anybody else, we have to look at that unit first.
Right.
And try to, and how do you even correct that? But a lot of it has to be the stigmatism of not making a ton of money if mom stays home, or if you live with grandma.
Right.
We have to get back to that, I think. I mean, and I could be off track with the gun violence part, but and knowing the drug addiction world, it helped us that my father-in-law didn't retire and go to Florida and buy a house and made a room where the kids could visit once in a year.
Right.
He stayed.
Right.
And when we needed him and we needed help to get my son into rehab, he was the rock. He was the one that said, nope, this is what's happening. We had that extra person in the room.
Right.
And my mother and father support us, but it was, it was him. It was the grandfather that lived down the street, the one that my son kind of respected and knew and was familiar with. And he wasn't calling from Florida or from another state. He was still right down the street like he always was.
Yeah.
And those are the types of units I think if we can get back to, and how do you legislate that?
You can't legislate everything.
You can't.
You can't write a law to fix everything.
You can't.
But we can. There are some, like I said earlier to you, it's a layered cake. Like there's so many things.
Is.
And the number one thing we know with gun violence, and probably what is from addiction, is hurt people hurt. Hurt people hurt other people. And until we really have wrap ourselves around that as a nation, we can legislate a lot of things, and we can make things, maybe slow down things, maybe reduce violence. But until we really get to the bottom of helping hurt people not hurt, they'll still reach for drugs. They'll still reach for firearms. They'll still, be abusive in relationships.
But legislatively, the things that we can do, I think we've done here in Connecticut to a good measure.
Absolutely.
And I think a lot of times it's kind of projecting out, and I think it happens a lot because, we have our own culture in each state. Mm-hmm. Like we're a very divided nation politically, but people are very proud of their gun ownership in certain states, and even here, if you're a gun owner in Connecticut, you're very proud that it's maybe a tradition that's been passed down through 5 generations, and you go to the same club that your great grandfather went to, and you shoot target practice, and all those things are understandable, I guess. But it's being able to be in one state, and like the young man that just purchased that gun, that wouldn't have been a thing that happened in Connecticut. On your 18th birthday, you just don't walk in and be able to buy an AR-15. You can't do that in Connecticut. And those are the types of laws, smart legislation. I think that although I think we've passed it up here, and I think people understand it up here. Is how do you make that something in Texas where they're not offended that we're telling them that they can't do what they've been doing for 150 years? And I think that's the secret ingredient. How do I know your group concentrates on stuff like that.
Me too, and I think now it comes down to a national issue. I mean, I think we can feel really safe and proud in Connecticut. Our gun violence has dramatically decreased over the years. We've passed very progressive. We have the safe storage. We have background checks. We have no assault weapons, no bump stocks. We've done a lot of good things that federally We need to. It needs to happen, and it needs to be the political will, which there has not been up to this point.
I think a lot of it has to do in poverty is a humongous driver.
Yeah.
Because our state doesn't experience, and I think, we always talk about when you say things. We talked about off air, like when someone come up to my wife and say, "I think you look great. You guys look like you're doing great. You're doing good." And to a survivor, a victim of homicide, a survivor of homicide, you're thinking, "No, I'm not great. Why would, if you think I'm great, then I must be looking like I'm getting back to normal. I don't feel normal."
Right.
And people you got to be careful with the words you use around victims and survivors, because and I think we both know that
Yeah.
from you deal with them, and
Yeah.
we hear different things, and I don't care what the situation is. You hear what affected you and what your knowledge is of something, and so when people come up and ask or say something like that, it's not your fault. You're saying what probably 99% of people will say, but you got to step back sometimes and you say, how would I feel if someone said I look great?
I do think that with so many survivors or co-victims of homicide, they do feel, especially if it's a child that they've lost or that's been taken from them, they feel like I didn't protect you. I hear that over and over again from mothers and fathers, that I was not able to protect my child and this happened. And so it makes perfect sense that there is that that guilt, like I haven't forgotten my child. I am still suffering, and they are still suffering. It is something, it doesn't go away. It doesn't, I don't even know that it gets better in time. Like what I've heard survivors tell me is that you learn to live through it. You survive, you live with it, but it doesn't go away.
No, and my wife, same son, two different people dealing with it.
Right.
My wife deals with it on an everyday basis. I think where the reminder of my son is just everywhere in her thoughts, in her mind, and it flows day by day in her blood. And for me, just because of my personality and who I am, I sometimes almost forget, and I'm just kind of going about my day or my life. And it's strange because you said, as people have weddings and they're going on with their life, for me to go to a wedding now, a lot of the kids are my son's age,
Right.
and they're having kids, and he has a huge family. We have a huge family. So the amount of babies that are happening. So those are moments, I think, for someone that's a survivor of homicide, where you're absolutely able to watch a wedding and insert where your son would be sitting or daughter would be sitting. There would be a groomsman or a bridesmaid. They'd be part of this because all the other cousins are in it. And how do you, I don't know, those are the tough parts for me probably. The reminders of what you lost, and how do you get past that?
I think what has been important about our organization is that survivors, supporting survivors and having that commonality, that common language, if you will, that same experience, that common experience, is the most powerful relationship and way to assist the families in those situations of surviving and going on with life. We talked about that earlier too. Like it's a whole different. Unless you've been there, you can't really necessarily completely relate to it.
We were pre-stigmatized. Before my son was murdered, we were part of a group for Community Speaks Out. It was something that was really driving for the answer and trying to get a group together talking about addiction. And you want to talk about being, if you found out that your mom or dad were going to Community Speaks Out meeting in Groton, or Community Speaks Out showed up at your house, that means that you guys had a drug problem. We even had schools refuse to have us come in. We're a free service.
Right.
We'll talk to anybody at any time, just like you guys, right?
Yeah.
Whether there's 3 people or 300 people, we find a way to get in. And there's been a couple schools that, because of the stigma of once this group shows up, that maybe we have to admit we have a problem or there's something happening. And we felt that stigma. And then to be part of a Survivors of Homicide group, to say, you're telling your friend that you're going out, I'm going to it's a Survivors of Homicide group dinner. And they're like, really? Like, why would you go to that? I mean, you guys are good, right? And the answer is no.
Right.
And the other answer is that when you do connect with other people that been through it, for me, whenever I see someone on TV, whether it's one person being shot and killed, I know I put myself in the shoes. I don't have to put myself. I lived it, but to know the road that these people have, I know that there's going to be a police officer that knocks on their door in the next hour or 2 hours. I know that they're going to get some reach out from the community, but then I also know that it's going to be on you and your family and how you can deal with it. And what do you recommend? I mean, for me, it's been counseling, and like I said, because my son brought addiction to our house ahead of time, it was almost like it helped me because I had never been to really counseling before. My wife and I, we kind of had a pretty good life that we considered normal, and of course you have your bumps in the road, but it was fairly normal and not much to worry about. And then this happened, the drug issue, and we were forced to go counseling, forced to find out things about ourselves that we didn't know before, and it was something that had to happen for me not to lose my mind.
Right.
When he was killed.
Right.
To get that call that night, we still didn't understand it, and we were still confused. But for someone in your group, do you recommend like counseling first, or what?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think so many people have different experiences than you and your wife, and different than my partner, Jen. And it's also very unique, but there's, 111 people are killed every day in this country. And so, probably why we're having this conversation, somewhere in Connecticut, someone could be killed with a firearm. And so many people don't have community support. They don't have resources. They have shame, stigma. There may have been some fear of criminal involvement. So we know that there's so many people out there that are hurting alone, that may not have the resources to even get to counseling or therapy. And so for that, I would love to say if you could check our website or reach out to us. We have lots of resources that make counseling accessible, that can help with the legal issues and the criminal aspect, should that be there. So it's a hard thing to say, but yes, if you can have counseling, yes, if you can get into homicide surveillance, wonderful group, wonderful support group. We have lots of support services here in Connecticut, but it's typically a survivor or a victim will only get that information right at the point of contact with the police department. And then for so many people, that's gone. And with so many victims, they do not have a trust of the police department.
Yeah.
And so that relationship never starts off to where they know how to contact the victim's advocate or to access services. So, I mean, if anything I could say today is to all those who are like possibly suffering in silence without those resources, they are available, and there's people to help you get it.
It's a great point, because our relationship with our police department was more than solid.
Right.
We had already developed a relationship because of the drug issue. All of our chiefs of police know my wife and I, and every board member by first name. We've gone to turnover meetings and talked to police officers about what's happening on the ground and how they could be part of the solution, and always had positive feedback. But it was the chief who kept telling me I need to call victims advocate.
Right.
And coming from this super large family, and my wife and I we didn't have a lot of money, so I think he was thinking, they can offer you services. And I said, Chief, you know what? We're going to be okay. Somebody else that needs services can get those, but I had a family member that was willing to pay for my son's funeral that said, listen, we don't want you to worry about anything. So, I'm very fortunate to even have that option. I knew it was something that I had that other people didn't. But when we spoke with the victims advocate, it was so much more than them saying so sorry and giving us, counseling.
Right.
They actually, through our insurance, paid for, the co-pays.
Right.
Which is $25 a copay for my insurance program, which if my wife and I are going 2 or 3 times a week, that becomes unaffordable for most families.
Exactly.
And the state was able to help with that. The state also paid $5,000 towards my son's funeral, which allows us to pay back the family member that stepped forward and
Right.
and help pay for the funeral. And I think those are things that, again, being part of the legislature, knowing that somebody had to make that a bill into a law,
Right.
knowing that so the victim, the stuff, the work that you do now and translate that into bills later is so important. So, that's why I appreciate anyone that's a part of any of these groups, no matter what the cause is, because the effect, the end result at the end is going to be better results for victims and survivors. And I know you've done a lot. Is there something else too that you guys focus on, that your group's top priority, or is it?
Well, right. I would say currently it's pursuing survivor or co-victims and victims justice rights. Victims and survivors, crime victims in the state of Connecticut have a few constitutional rights, not many, and no remedy for those rights, and really no access to pursue or practice those. So we would like to see them. We have to every legislative session, and I know you get letters from me.
Yeah.
Lots of letters every session. There's bills that come out, and I get that legislators are there to write laws, but every session there are, how many laws do you think are proposed every session?
6,000.
Okay. And so
150 people.
600 of them could impact a violent crime survivor or victim. And so we are constantly on the defensive trying to find those. And they're good intentioned. It's not that a legislator has intended to violate a victim or survivor. They just don't know. That's not necessarily their wheelhouse. So.
And I think every single bill that I've seen, no matter what your intentions were, it usually came from a constituent or a group where they're fighting the same battle you are, but it's a game of inches, but it's also people say, well, you put in 6,000 bills and only this many passed, which is true, but a lot of those bills get incorporated to other bills.
Oh, they do.
And so you do have to be careful and find out that what affects what change. I know, I'm on. There's the clean slate bill. I know you guys you were able to get some carve outs. The people that I work with were so concerned that we had friends that were in trouble, and they get put in these minimum wage jobs for the next 100 years because they weren't able to get out. So the heavy crimes that you guys were able to carve in or carve out of that bill was something that I think you can hang your hat on as a group.
Absolutely, that was yes.
And we only have 1 minute left. I told you this was
See,
fast.
it does go fast.
So if I don't know, you would say say your name or your group name again, or contact information.
It's Violent Crime Survivors.
Right up there.
Yes, it's up there. Please reach out to us. This year we've grown quite a bit. We've had, besides, in addition to gun violence survivors, we work with all survivors of violent crime and victims. So if you have a need, socially, emotionally, financially, legally, we're here to support you.
And I just want to thank you again for coming all the way from Greenwich. Like I said, people in any other state will never understand the distance that actually is on 95, because it is probably one of the slower turnpikes on the planet. But thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for coming out here today. This is Born Political. Another great guest, another great week. Thank you very much, and I hope to maybe have you on where we can just talk about who you are.
Thank you.
Because it was great to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.